Hello. Please note that this presentation is for infrastructure recipients only. If you are the recipient of an equipment-only grant, please refer to that recording. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the California Department of Food and Agriculture, or CDFA's, Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure, or RFSI, webinar for recipients. Today's presentation will cover what you need to know to start your grant successfully. Some topics will be covered in greater detail later, either in another training or via communication from your assigned grant analyst, so as to not make today's meeting overly long.
This first slide covers general information for grant recipients. The RFSI recipient website, linked on this slide, has the most comprehensive and up-to-date information for grant recipients, including the Grant Management Procedures Manual, a list of allowable and unallowable costs and activities, information on prior approval, and other important material. As a reminder, you are required to follow all applicable federal and state regulations. More details can be found on page 3 of the Grant Management Procedures Manual. The equipment purchased must be similar to, but not identical to, the originally requested equipment. If you requested a refrigerated van, you must purchase a refrigerated van. You may change the manufacturer of the vehicle, purchasing from Ford versus Mercedes-Benz, but you cannot switch to a different type of vehicle. All purchases and work done must follow your statement of work. As always, when you have questions, check with your grant analyst. Finally, your grant analyst is your best resource, but please be patient and remember CDFA is processing 120 other grants at the same time. We will respond to you as soon as possible. You can expect a response from your grant analyst within 2 business days. However, we cannot control when your grant agreement will begin processing.
Grant agreement execution will be handled by CDFA's Grant Awards Unit, or GAU. This includes the creation and execution of the grant agreements. You will receive an email from Lauren Bollinger, a GAU analyst. Be sure to check your emails frequently and ensure you are being responsive to any and all emails. The signed grant agreement is your contract with CDFA. Please read it thoroughly prior to signing. If you have any questions, reach out to your RFSI grant analyst immediately to discuss. Delaying the signature will in turn delay the execution of your grant agreement and delay your advance and/or your reimbursement. The grant agreement is not considered executed until a GAU manager signs it and executes it. You will receive a second email from Lauren B. with your executed grant agreement that contains all the required signatures. A reimbursement or an advance will not be processed until your grant agreement is executed and submitted to the Financial Services Office for processing. The process time between grant agreement execution and payments can take up to 45 business days.
As was just mentioned, you are expected to follow your approved scope of work and budget, which are included in your grant agreement. What happens if you need to make a change? In many cases, this is allowable. However, some changes require prior approval from CDFA and in some cases from USDA. This information is in the Grant Management Procedures Manual you receive at the time of signing your grant agreement. To make things simpler, CDFA has also created a "When is prior approval required" document linked on the Recipient Resources website at www.cdfa.gov/RFSI/recipients. If you are uncertain whether a change is allowable or if it requires prior approval, as always, please check with your grant analyst before making any changes. Remember that unapproved changes or items not included in your scope of work are not eligible for reimbursement.
An important part of receiving grant funds is record retention. This is where you keep and submit project-related records. For your RFSI project, you will have to retain all financial records, project records, and supporting documents until January 31st, 2030, or until any litigation related to the grant is resolved, whichever date is later. All records must be made available to OGA or its designees upon request. Records that must be retained include actual expenditure invoices of direct costs charged to the grant funds, as well as matching funds and all other supporting documentation related to the grant agreement. Examples of some project-related records to retain are receipts of equipment purchases, purchase orders, construction invoices, insurance and other bills related to fringe benefits, personnel timesheets, mileage logs, bookkeeping documents, and any other documents related to your project and spending grant and match funds. In short, keep everything, all records, all documentation. Of course, if a cost is not included in your budget and you will not be seeking funding for those costs, that is outside of your grant and documentation for that is not required. You must retain or submit receipts from every purchase. Just remember, no receipt, no money. You cannot be paid or reimbursed if you do not have the required documentation. In order to be paid, you will have to submit all receipts with invoices to your grant analyst. Receipts should be itemized and sufficiently detailed to include purchases, installation costs, contractor fees, and any other fees mentioned in your SOW. Err on the side of caution and remember to keep all grant-related records. Keep physical documents together in a safe place. We recommend scanning the records into an electronic version as you receive them and keeping the electronic records in a computer folder easily accessible to you. Please be sure all receipts and documents are legible. For further details regarding record retention, please refer to the Infrastructure Grant Management Procedures Manual on the Recipient Resources website. Records for fringe benefits and indirect costs are also required records that must be retained. Examples of records for fringe benefits and indirect costs can include contract with health insurance company, monthly invoices for workers' compensation insurance, utility bills, general bookkeeping services, and personnel costs. Fringe benefits must be billed at or below actual costs in accordance with your organization's established fringe benefits policy. Billing fringe benefits based on estimated rates is unallowable. Matching funds. Match must follow your scope of work. Personnel time must be expended as described in your SOW. Cash match must be expended on the items specified in the budget in your SOW. In-kind match must be expended on the items specified in the budget in your SOW. Review this with your grant analyst. Personnel matching funds. Timesheet requirements also apply to salaries counted as match under the RFSI grant. To be allowable as match, a cost must be allowable as a grant charge. All requirements that apply to your grant funds also apply to matching funds, including completing and submitting personnel timesheets. Personnel and timekeeping. Activity reports, such as the timesheet you will see in the next couple of slides, are required to support salary and wage and fringe benefit expenditures charged to RFSI grants. Each report must account for the total activity for which each employee is compensated, as well as the hours worked on a particular RFSI grant project. A description of activities must be included, and the description must include enough detail to demonstrate the activity is project-related. This also applies to salaried employees, such as executive directors. Costs that are not adequately supported on the activity report or timesheet are unallowable and will not be reimbursed. If you have questions on what is acceptable to put on your timesheet, consult with your grant analyst. For further details, please refer to the Grant Management Procedures Manual for Infrastructure on the Recipient Resources website. Tracking personnel time with timesheets. Personnel timekeeping must be adequately documented, comply with the federal requirements, comply with the Grant Management Procedures Manual, include a process of authorization and approval, account for the total activity for employee salaries and wages covered by RFSI funds, including matching funds, account for the total activity for employee salaries and wages covered by other non-RFSI programs and sources, reflect the amount of time and RFSI activities and duties that were approved in the scope of work, and for full-time employees, personnel timekeeping must add up to full-time hours reflected in the employee's pay. Here's an example of an adequately completed timesheet with all the required information filled out. Timesheets must be filled out completely. All highlighted sections must be completed, as well as the daily and total hours worked. Timesheets that meet RFSI grant requirements must include employee name, employee title, the reporting period, the month and the year, and in this example, it is October 2025. Total number of hours worked that month on your RFSI project and other non-RFSI federal grant programs. Each federal grant program should be reflected on separate lines. The columns numbered 1 through 31 reflect the day of the month and should reflect the number of hours worked that day. Total number of hours is the last column on the right and will include hours worked on other job duties outside of your RFSI project and outside of other federal grant programs. These hours will be reflected in the row labeled Other Job Duties Performed. This will likely include your day-to-day or operational duties. Timesheets must also include the following. In the first column on the left, the project name or title for RFSI and non-RFSI federal grant programs. Towards the bottom of the timesheet, in the box labeled Description of Work Performed, you will include a description of RFSI activities performed that can be traced to the project's scope of work, and a description of activities performed for each non-RFSI federal grant project or program, as well as a description of the employee's other job duties. Employee and employee's supervisor signatures at the bottom of the timesheet must be filled out. Digital signatures are acceptable. Please contact your assigned grant analyst to obtain a blank copy of the Excel file used in this example. You do not need to use this particular timesheet, but you can if your organization does not already have timesheets that meet all RFSI grant requirements. Please see the personnel and timekeeping instructions on the Recipients Resources website for requirements and a more detailed breakdown of completing this timesheet. The link to the Recipients Resources website is at the bottom of this slide.
Equipment tracking and purchasing. All equipment purchased with grant funds must be adequately trackable and uniquely identifiable. This can be the VIN or serial number that is on a vehicle or equipment. If one is not present, it must be permanently modified via attaching a plaque to, engraving the equipment or similar, to have a unique identification number. We recommend using your agreement number. Note that Equipment 1 is not sufficiently unique. It is not necessary to do this for supplies. The equipment inventory record form must also be completed when equipment is purchased. Your grant analyst will share this with you, or it is available on the recipient's website. Equipment disposition. CDFA will have additional training that is closer to project closeout, where we will discuss what happens to equipment after the grant performance period. Additional details will be forthcoming. Your grant analyst will be able to answer any questions you may have.
Advance payments are available for up to 90% of the grant-funded total. The remaining 10% will be withheld for closing costs and will be released at the end of the grant term. To request an advance payment, reach out to your assigned RFSI grant analyst and request an advance payment request form. To qualify for an advance, you must provide a justification for the immediate needs of funds requested. These advance payment funds must be spent within 90 days. Capital gains cannot be accrued with these funds. Any capital gains that are accrued must be returned to CDFA. If an advance payment is requested to cover funds such as personnel costs, the recipient can only request a reasonable portion of the personnel costs. Your advance payment may not be approved if you request the entire budgeted personnel costs for the entire grant duration. The recipient is still required to submit an invoice, personnel time logs, and/or receipts after purchases are made. Please reach out to your assigned RFSI grant analyst if you have any questions.
This slide will cover invoicing. There are two types of payment methods for allowable costs incurred: advance payments, which were covered in the prior slide, and reimbursement payments. Invoices must be completed no more than monthly and no less than quarterly including if no costs were expended. Your grant analyst will send you the invoice with detailed instructions, and you will then fill it out and send it back. Please remember to include all supporting documentation, such as receipts, etc. The final 10% of an award is withheld from reimbursement and advance payments until the conditions of closeout are met. Closeout procedures will be covered at a later date. This slide shows a sample invoice. The sample project budget is on the middle left of the invoice. Your grant analyst will fill out certain fields on the form and instruct you how to fill out your part of the form. Once you fill out the invoice, you will send it back with supporting documentation, such as receipts, etc.
Your scope of work, or SOW, is part of your grant agreement, which is your legal contract with CDFA. It must be followed exactly. Should changes occur during your project, you will be required to complete a scope of work revision. If you anticipate needing a scope of work revision, please reach out to your assigned grant analyst as soon as possible. They will provide you with the necessary steps and/or forms to complete your scope of work revision. As mentioned, some changes will require CDFA and/or USDA approval. Please keep your grant analyst up to date on all project changes. They will make sure you remain in compliance. Remember, if a cost is not included in your scope of work, you will not be reimbursed for those costs. Changes that can be made include shifting funds from one budget category to another. Say you get a good deal on your equipment and want to move a few $100s from the equipment category to the construction category. Updating mailing addresses, contact person, contact information, etc. Minor changes to equipment, supplies, contractors, etc. Note that scope of work revisions are not necessary if you are just switching brands from what is included in your scope of work. Minor changes to project activities, such as changes to timelines or partner organizations, and small decreases to total grant-funded costs. You don't have to worry about spending every single cent, though you are welcome to. Changes that cannot be made include changes to the project location. This is where the activities are taking place. Changes to the recipient organization. Changes to the performance measures. If you cannot meet your performance measures, this is just explained in the final report. Major changes to costs or activities will not be approved. Remember that you have been approved by CDFA and USDA for the project described in your scope of work. Also, increases to indirect costs or to total grant-funded costs are not allowed.
Financial review. There are 3 types of financial reviews that recipients can expect. The type of review will be selected by the CDFA Audit Office. This information is not yet available. CDFA will reach out with more information when the time is appropriate. You can learn more about how to prepare for a successful audit using the document that is available on the recipient resource page, or you can request it from your grant analyst. Reports. Infrastructure projects will be required to complete 2 annual reports and a final report for USDA. Templates will be provided by USDA and shared by CDFA as soon as possible. The report will ask you to outline progress toward your performance measures and project objectives. We encourage you to develop tracking mechanisms to keep tabs on your progress in these areas if you have not already done so. Additional details will be forthcoming. Site visits. All infrastructure recipients will have a site visit, whether in person or virtually. The details have not yet been finalized. Your grant analyst will coordinate with you, and details will be forthcoming. Project closeout. The grant duration for infrastructure recipients ends on February 26, 2027. Details for project closeout will be provided in a future training closer to the end of the performance period.
Here are some of the resources that were discussed in this presentation. The CDFA RFSI Recipients website will contain all of the forms and informational sheets you may need, including the Grant Management Procedures Manual. Remember to refer to your approved scope of work and/or grant agreement when needed. And finally, your assigned grant analyst is here to help you. Reach out as soon as you know you have a question or doubt to avoid any issues. That concludes the presentation for Infrastructure Program recipients. Thank you.